I should have known something was wrong the moment she said it with that casual, breezy tone, the kind people use when they're not asking for permission so much as announcing the beginning of a new era. We should talk about opening things up. She'd said it halfway through a bottle of cheap Pinot Noir, curled against me like nothing in the world was shifting, while some forgettable rom-com flickered in the background, as if we were still the kind of couple who laughed at the same scenes. But there was a look in her eyes, soft but hungry, like someone who had already tasted freedom elsewhere and was now pretending to offer me the same. I remember the exact way my chest tightened, like the air had thickened, like the floor tilted a fraction of a degree. Not enough to fall, just enough to know that if I kept standing where I was, gravity might start doing the rest. I laughed because it felt easier than responding honestly. I asked if she meant adding someone to the bedroom, a one-time thrill, a spicy detour. But Rachel shook her head and brushed her hair back like she was announcing new weekend plans, not the slow collapse of our marriage. She wanted us both to date, to explore, to rediscover desire as though it had somehow slipped between the couch cushions. I'd been with her long enough to recognize when a decision had already been made, the tone of certainty, the calm in her voice. She wasn't asking. She was revealing. Even then, even as my pulse lurched, I tried to pretend it was fine. She spoke about rules, her rules really, and I nodded along even though each one sounded like a brick laid neatly on top of my chest. No friends, no coworkers, no family. She said that part with a firmness that made me almost laugh, because the thought of looking at Jess that way seemed ridiculous back then. Jess, the younger sister with the chaotic eyeliner and graphic tees, the girl who used to raid our fridge when she visited and fall asleep on our couch mid-conversation. Jess, who was trouble in the charming way only 22-year-olds can be, but who I'd always seen as the kid sister in the background of our lives. Back then, she was harmless. Or at least, I thought she was. We shook hands on the rules like idiots who believed handshakes still meant something, like the problem with our marriage was a lack of structure rather than the quiet unraveling happening in all the places we didn't want to look. I told myself I was being open-minded, modern, progressive, whatever word made it sound less like a slow-motion breakup disguised as liberation. Rachel changed almost immediately. It wasn't subtle. She started glowing in that way people glow when they know someone new is paying attention. New clothes, new hair, new confidence. The kind that clings to the skin and makes them walk differently, breathe differently, move through the world like it finally noticed them again. She smiled more, hummed while making coffee, checked her phone with that tiny smirk she thought I didn't see. Meanwhile, I tried dating apps, tried swiping, tried playing the game she swore would inspire passion and honesty, and all those poetic phrases people use when they want permission to chase thrills. But while her nights grew later and her excuses thinner, mine stayed quiet. Matches fizzled, conversations died, and every time her side of the bed stayed cold until morning, I lay awake wondering if the heat in her skin was meant for someone else now. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I could handle the distance, the secrets slipping under the door like drafts I tried to ignore. I told myself this was what we'd agreed to. But desire is a strange thing. It fills the gaps you don't pay attention to. It finds the cracks you pretend aren't there. And it sneaks up on you in moments you don't expect. Like at 2 a.m, staring at my phone when a message from Jess slid into my DMs. It should have meant nothing. A meme. Stupid. Harmless. But then the next message came. You up? 2 words that shouldn't have made my heart thump harder. 2 words I should have ignored. 2 words that felt like a spark landing in the exact spot where everything inside me was already drying out. She noticed me. She always had, apparently. She teased me for liking her posts late at night. She said she'd heard things about Rachel and her so-called discretion, or lack of it. Jess said these things softly, almost apologetically, but with a sharpness beneath it, like she was slipping me the truth I'd been too afraid to dig for. That was when the ground really shifted. Not all at once, but in a slow, deliberate slide. Not because I planned to cross any lines. Not because desire hit me like lightning. But because for the first time in months, Someone was looking at me instead of past me. And the worst part, the part I still haven't forgiven myself for, is how much I needed that. Even before anything happened, even before I knew how far things would go, I felt the story changing, the temperature of the room shifting, the gravity realigning. I didn't know it yet, but Jess was about to become the center of every forbidden thought I swore I'd never have. And Rachel, well, she was already gone. The strange thing about crossing a line is that it rarely feels like crossing one. It feels like drifting, slowly, quietly, towards something you've already been imagining. That night, lying in the dark with Rachel's side of the bed cold and perfectly made, I stared at the ceiling and replayed Jess's messages until they blurred together in a loop. You've been off lately. She's not being discreet. You deserve to know that. She wasn't being flirty when she said it. Not exactly. There was a softness in her words, but underneath it, something sharper, something protective, something dangerously close to choosing sides. And that alone should have scared me more than it did. The next morning, Rachel left early for yoga, her hair still damp from the shower she swore she took because she was sweating in her sleep. I watched her walk to the car in leggings that were just a little too tight, her ponytail bouncing like she was 17 again and sneaking out for fun instead of sex. She blew me a careless kiss through the window, the kind someone gives when they're already mentally elsewhere. The silence that followed her departure felt heavy in a way I couldn't shake. And then, almost without thinking, I checked Instagram again. Jess had posted a new photo. Nothing explicit, nothing incriminating. Just her in an oversized shirt, my old Foo Fighters tee, the one I'd been hunting for since winter, and hair that looked playfully messy, like she'd just rolled out of bed. Only the edge of her bare thigh peeked from under the hem, but that was enough to send a strange warmth through my chest. Her caption was a single word: morning. 200 likes in an hour, fire emojis, comments from guys I didn't recognize, and one message notification I definitely recognized. Jess, you recognize the shirt? I should have stopped right there. Should have ignored the message the way a married man is supposed to. Should have felt the appropriate guilt or alarm. Instead, my fingers moved like they were acting on their own. Me, what are you doing? Her reply came fast, almost too fast. Jess, having a little fun, unless you want me to stop. There it was, that flicker of tension I'd been trying so hard to ignore. And it wasn't just about the shirt or the teasing. It was the unspoken truth beneath it. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she wasn't afraid to test the boundaries her sister had carved into stone. For hours that day, the memory of her shirt, her caption, her knowing smirk refused to leave my mind. Every time I tried to distract myself, my thoughts drifted back to her leaning against her apartment wall, wearing something of mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. By the time Jess messaged later that night, we should hang out sometime, just you and me, I had already lost the version of myself who would have said no. I stared at the message for a long time, long enough that my phone dimmed and brightened twice, long enough that I could hear Rachel upstairs getting ready for another night with coworkers, humming some carefree tune that made my jaw clench. Maybe it was resentment, maybe loneliness, maybe the need to be seen, or maybe I wanted to feel chosen again. Me, when are you free? Her answer was immediate, as if she'd been waiting. Jess, Friday. I'll be near your place. Want to grab a drink? I should have asked why she'd be near my place. I should have asked why she sounded so sure I'd say yes. I should have asked any of the responsible questions. Instead, me. Sure, come by. We'll keep it casual. Her response came with a smile I could practically hear through the screen. Jess, you sure? Me. Why wouldn't I be? Jess, because I'm me, Jake. That one sentence sat in my chest for the rest of the night like a living thing. When Friday came, the house felt different, charged, expectant. I cleaned even though I told myself I wasn't cleaning for her. I lit a candle even though I told myself I just liked the scent. I paced the kitchen barefoot with a glass of whiskey because I couldn't sit still. The knock at the door wasn't soft. Jess never did soft. She stepped inside like she already belonged there, black jeans hugging her hips, a cropped top that left almost nothing to imagination, and a leather jacket slung over her shoulder like she'd walked out of a music video. She brushed past me, smelling faintly of citrus and something warm. "You smell like soap and guilt," she teased. "And God help me." I almost laughed. I almost forgot about the rules. I almost forgot whose sister she was. We drank. We talked. We let our knees touch. She played my vinyl like she'd been waiting for the day she'd get to choose the soundtrack. And every time her eyes lingered on me a second too long, something inside me tightened. I kept telling myself I wouldn't cross the line. But the truth was simple. The moment she walked through my door, the line was already behind me. What I remember most about that night wasn't the way Jess looked, or how her thigh brushed mine, or the way her voice dipped when she got serious. What I remember most was the moment I realized how easy it would be to fall into her. It wasn't flirtation, not really. Jess didn't flirt. She provoked. Every glance, every shift of her body toward me felt like a small dare. She set herself down on my couch like she was laying a trap, not for my body, but for my honesty. Around 10:30, she got up and wandered to the record shelf. She flipped through vinyl like she was searching for something that mattered, humming under her breath. Then she put on the Rolling Stones, one of Rachel's favorites, and I couldn't tell if she did it intentionally or if chaos was just her native language. When the first notes drifted through the room, she turned toward me with her chin slightly lifted. "So," she said, "no Rachel tonight?" There was no judgment in her voice, no shock, no surprise, just curiosity laced with something else, something light and teasing but observant. It was the observation that got to me. "No," I said, keeping my tone even. "She's out." "With who?" I shrugged. "Didn't ask." Jess tilted her head in a way that told me she wasn't satisfied with the answer. She took a few slow steps toward me, arms crossing over her midriff, drawing my eyes without even trying. "You really don't ask?" she said softly. "What's the point?" I replied, trying to sound detached, but my voice came out tighter than I wanted. "We made the rules." Jess stopped in front of me, not close enough to touch, but close enough that I felt the gravity of her presence. Her eyes stayed steady on mine, a mixture of empathy and something more dangerous. "You know," she said, "I always wondered why you stayed with her. Even before all this." I felt that like a hand around my ribs. "Marriage is complicated," I said. "So is attraction." Her voice dipped, quiet, honest, like she was confessing something without saying it outright. The moment stretched between us, soft and charged. Her breathing slowed, mine quickened. Her leg brushed mine again. No accident this time, and the world narrowed to the space between us. I stood abruptly, breaking the tension in a clumsy, almost panicked move. "You want another drink?" I asked. Jess didn't move. "No," she said, her voice low. "I want you to tell me what you're afraid of." That stopped everything. The room, the air, even the goddamn music. I told her I wasn't afraid. She didn't buy it. She stepped closer, close enough that her scent, soft citrus layered over warm skin, wrapped around me in a way I hadn't felt in years. Her fingers brushed my arm, barely there, but enough to send heat skittering through me. "You're afraid," she whispered, "that if you let yourself want what you want, you'll turn into her. Her, Rachel." Before I could respond, Jess's phone buzzed. She glanced down and then looked at me with a complicated, almost pained expression. "Speak of the devil." I raised a brow. "Rachel?" "Yep," Jess said, showing me the screen like she needed me to see it. It was a photo message, champagne flutes, a city skyline, and a distinctly masculine hand brushing her waist. The caption, "Making Memories." It wasn't even subtle. She wasn't even pretending anymore. Jess watched my face closely. Too closely. "Still want to talk about rules?" she murmured. Something inside me tightened. Not just anger, but clarity. A brutal kind of clarity that made everything suddenly sharp. Jess took another small step toward me. Not predatory, not apologetic. Just there, warm and steady. Her lips hovered dangerously close to mine. Her hand skimmed my waist, barely touching. "Jake," she whispered, "you don't have to keep being the only one playing fair." For a fraction of a second, a literal heartbeat, I leaned in. Not enough to make contact. Not enough to make it real. But enough to feel the heat of her breath brush my mouth. And then I pulled back. "We can't," I said, though the words felt hollow in my mouth. Jess stared at me for a long moment. Not angry, not disappointed, just searching my face as if she could see the battle I was trying, failing, to fight. "Okay," she finally said, grabbing her jacket. "Then I'll go." She walked toward the door, slow, deliberate, giving me every chance to stop her. My chest tightened with every step she took. When she reached the doorway, she paused, hand on the knob. "You ever change your mind?" she said without turning around. "You know where to find me." The door clicked shut, soft but final. I stood there, heart pounding, throat tight, knowing the truth I didn't want to admit. Even if nothing had happened yet, I'd already crossed the line. I didn't plan on looking. That's the part that still gets me. I wasn't snooping, wasn't hunting for proof, wasn't that cliché of a husband rifling through drawers trying to confirm what his gut already screamed. I was just walking past the nightstand when her iPad lit up, vibrating once against the wood. A preview flashed across the screen, just enough to tilt the ground beneath me for good. It was from someone named Eli, with a wolf emoji next to the name. "Can't stop thinking about how you looked in that hoodie. Should have stayed one more night." My hoodie. The one she lost months ago. The rip in the sleeve. The faint scent of cedar. The one she used to steal every winter. My chest tightened in a way that felt almost surgical, precise, slow. I told myself not to look any further. Told myself I'd already crossed enough invisible lines for 1 week. And then I tapped the notification anyway. The message vanished into Instagram, but not her main account. No. This was a private profile buried under a fake name. The handle was tacky, flirty, something she would have mocked on someone else. But the photos inside? God. I didn't know who I was looking at. There she was. Rachel. But not the Rachel who came home exhausted and half-dressed and muttering about deadlines. This version of her glowed. She smiled with teeth. She wore outfits I'd never seen. Lingerie she didn't buy for me. Makeup she only used on special occasions. Apparently occasions that didn't include me. What gutted me wasn't the sex implied in the photos. I had agreed to that possibility. No, it was something quieter, more insidious. The intimacy in the pictures, the softness in her eyes, the way she leaned into someone else's hands like she used to lean into mine years ago. And then I saw the photo. Her body sprawled across a bed that wasn't ours. Damp hair, bare shoulder. My hoodie draped over her like a claim. A man's arm, strong, tan, anonymous, curled around her waist. Her caption read, "Sunday mornings are for sin." I stared at it so long I forgot how to breathe. Rachel stepped out of the shower then, humming some upbeat indie tune. She handed me her mug, towel wrapped around her like she hadn't just uploaded half her secrets to the world behind a username I wasn't supposed to find. "Can you put the kettle on?" she said, breezing past me. She didn't notice the way my hands shook. Didn't notice that I kept my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. In the kitchen, the kettle hissed and steamed, fogging the window while the image burned itself into my brain. The hoodie. Her smile. His hand. It wasn't jealousy this time. Not exactly. It was something colder, heavier, a sense of betrayal wrapped in the cruel realization that she had done all of this while still pretending this experiment was mutual. Fair. Honest. Later that evening, she got dressed for dinner with Amy. She wore a dress I'd never seen, a dress that hugged her in ways that made something inside me twist, not with desire but with clarity. Before she left, I said quietly, "Amy, huh?" She paused at the door, applying lipstick with a practiced hand. "Yes. Why?" "No reason. Just Seems like you've had a lot of late nights." That made her freeze. Just a moment. A flicker. Then her annoyance returned, sharp and dismissive. "We agreed, Jake," she snapped. "Don't start getting possessive just because you're finally feeling something." And then she left, slamming the door with a finality I didn't miss. But the strange thing was, I didn't crumble. I didn't spiral. I didn't drown under the weight of what she'd done. Instead, I felt something shift in me, subtle but powerful, like a hinge turning, like a door unlocking inside a house I'd lived in for years without realizing half the rooms had been locked from the start. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to chase her through a maze she built for herself. No, I was going to match her. That night, lying alone in bed again, staring at the ceiling, I opened my messages. Jess's last text was still there. "Still thinking about you. Or maybe about what we haven't done. Yet." My thumbs hovered for a moment. Then I typed, "Come over tomorrow. Late." She replied within seconds. "What time?" The next day, when the sun sank and the world got quiet, Jess knocked on the door with a look in her eyes that made something inside me wake up for the first time in months. Not healed, not whole, but awake and ready. Jess showed up just after 10, exactly when I told her to. Not early, not coy, not testing boundaries. Just on time, like someone who had already made up her mind long before she knocked. I opened the door, and she stepped inside without hesitation, her hair slightly messy like she'd driven with the windows down, her eyes sharp and searching for something in my face. "You okay?" she asked. "No," I said honestly, "but come in." The moment she walked past me, the air changed. There was a heat to her, an energy that filled the silence between us in a way that made my pulse thrum. Not lust, not just lust, but something more complicated, heavier, a mix of comfort and danger that felt impossible to name. She dropped her duffel bag by the door and followed me to the kitchen like she had been here 100 times before. I poured whiskey for both of us. I don't know why. Maybe habit, maybe ritual. But we didn't drink. We just stood there, glasses in hand, facing each other in a quiet standoff. "You saw something," she said at last. I nodded. Her private account. Jess didn't ask what was on it. Her face softened in a way that made my chest tighten. "I'm sorry," she murmured, and for the first time since everything started, she didn't look like a tease or a temptation. She looked like someone who understood exactly how it felt to be replaced. She reached out and touched my hand, not flirtatiously, not provocatively, just a gentle brush of fingers over skin that made my breath catch. "Jake, you were trying to play fair. She wasn't." Something inside me cracked softly at that. Not a break, not a snap, just a release of tension I didn't realize I'd been gripping for months. I exhaled, slow and uneven, and Jess stepped a little closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You don't have to keep pretending you're okay." She touched my arm again, but this time her touch lingered, warm, intentional, grounding. It wasn't sexual. It wasn't innocent. It was something in between, something that made my heart pick up in a way I hadn't felt in years. I didn't kiss her. She didn't kiss me. But the space between us shifted, just slightly, like gravity recalibrating. Then she did something that changed everything. She took the whiskey glass from my hand and set it aside, gently, like removing the last barrier between us. "You don't have to be careful with me," she said, her voice steady but her eyes bright with a kind of fragile boldness I hadn't expected. "Jess," I started, but the words tangled in my throat. She stepped closer, close enough that her sweater brushed my chest, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "Jake," she whispered, "I'm not here to complicate your life. I'm here because you deserve someone who actually sees you." That hit deeper than I wanted it to, maybe deeper than she knew. Before I could respond, she reached up and placed her hand lightly on the back of my neck, not pulling me in, just resting there, waiting. Her gaze flickered over my face, searching for resistance, hesitation, anything that might push her away. I didn't move. She didn't push. The tension between us stretched tight and trembling, but instead of snapping, it settled, like we'd finally reached a place we'd been moving toward for weeks. "You sure?" she whispered. "No," I said, "but I'm tired of pretending I don't want something real." Jess smiled then, not the flirtatious smirk she usually wore, but something softer, almost relieved. She leaned her forehead against mine, breathing me in, letting the moment stretch. Her hand slid down my neck to my chest, not in a hungry way, but in the kind of affectionate touch people give when they're letting themselves feel vulnerable. We stood like that for a long moment, two people hovering on the edge of something neither of us planned, something neither of us could name without breaking it. Then she pulled back slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "If I stay, this changes everything." "Maybe it should," I said. She exhaled shakily, like the decision had just been made for her. She reached behind herself, lifted the hem of her sweater, and let it fall from her fingers onto the kitchen chair. Not to seduce, not to push me over the edge, but like she was shedding the last piece of hesitation she carried. Her camisole underneath was soft, simple, nothing meant to entice, and somehow that made it more intimate than anything else. She wasn't performing. She wasn't testing me. She was just Jess. Real, present, warm. She stepped closer again and rested her hands lightly on my chest, her eyes fixed on mine. "Tell me to stop," she whispered. "I can't," I murmured. "Not anymore." And in that quiet, breathless admission, the shift finally happened. Not in our bodies, but in our understanding of each other. We didn't rush. We didn't collide. We simply let the moment take us where it had been headed all along. Not lust, not revenge, not desperation, just two people choosing each other when everything else had fallen apart. Jess stayed until morning. I didn't ask her to. She just did, with that quiet certainty she carried in her bones, the kind that made the night feel less like a mistake and more like an inevitability. When sunlight stretched across the sheets, warm and blinding, she slipped out of bed wearing nothing but Rachel's white silk robe, the one with lace trim. A robe that had always looked too delicate for Rachel's sharp edges, but somehow looked right on Jess, softer, warmer, lived in. She padded into the kitchen barefoot, humming a tune I didn't recognize. The sound drifted through the house like it belonged there, like it had been waiting for someone to play it. When I walked in, she was flipping pancakes, like this was a Sunday morning we'd shared 100 times. "You don't cook breakfast," I said. She grinned without turning around. "I know, but you looked like you needed someone to." There was no flirtation in it, no seduction, just a gentle, unspoken acknowledgement of the night we'd crossed into something neither of us could come back from. She set a plate in front of me, kissed the side of my head in a way that was painfully tender, and whispered, "You're allowed to feel good." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until the words settled into my chest like warmth. But whatever calm the morning offered didn't last long. The front door opened around 9, late enough for Rachel to pretend she'd been at brunch, early enough to make the lie believable. She stepped inside with her sunglasses on her head, a shopping bag dangling from her wrist. Her smile froze the instant she saw Jess's robe hanging loosely off my shoulders. Her eyes darted from the robe to the plate of pancakes to the second mug on the table, and there was a beat of silence where everything inside the house seemed to tilt. "Morning," I said, my voice calm. Too calm. Rachel blinked. Once. Twice. Then she stepped forward with a smile so carefully constructed it looked like it might crack under its own weight. "Sorry I didn't call," she said airily, forcing cheer into her voice. "Lauren's phone died. We were out later than we planned." She stopped mid-sentence. Jess walked out of the hallway at that exact moment, still barefoot, still humming, still wearing the robe Rachel bought on a treat-yourself spree 2 years ago. Rachel's mouth fell open. For a second, she looked like she might faint. Jess saw her, paused, then smiled, not smug, not taunting, just quietly sure of her place in that moment. "Morning," she said softly. Rachel didn't respond. She couldn't. Her breathing hitched, sharp and shaky, like someone had stolen the script from her hands right before opening night. She looked at me, eyes wide, scanning my face for an explanation that didn't exist. "We said honesty, right?" I murmured. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She set her shopping bag down on the table with trembling hands, the paper crinkling sharply in the silence. "Are you going to say something?" I asked. Rachel swallowed hard. "Jake, what is this?" I held her gaze. Steady, calm. The calm of someone who had walked through fire and come out the other side with nothing left to lose. "This," I said quietly, "is you not being the only one living your truth." Jess didn't smirk. She didn't posture. She simply stepped to my side and rested her fingertips on the counter, grounding herself as if she expected an explosion and wanted to be steady when it came. Rachel blinked rapidly, her eyes filling in a way I hadn't seen since the early years of our marriage. She looked hurt, devastated, betrayed, and for a moment, an honest, human moment, my chest tightened with guilt. Because despite everything, once upon a time she had been mine, and I had been hers, and that meant something. But then I remembered the burner account, the hotel rooms, the photos, the way she'd smiled into another man's camera wearing my hoodie, and the guilt dissolved into something quieter, something bordering on acceptance. Rachel found her voice eventually, though it trembled. "Why her, Jake? Why my sister?" I didn't flinch. "Because she saw me when you didn't." Jess didn't speak. She didn't need to. The shaking in Rachel's shoulders softened into something almost childlike. Fear, confusion, the raw realization that she no longer controlled the story she set in motion. She wiped at her cheeks, breath uneven. "We were supposed to trust each other." "We were supposed to respect the rules," I replied. "But you broke them first. You know you did." Silence followed, thick, heavy, unavoidable. Rachel stood there in the doorway, mascara smudging beneath her eyes, staring at the robe she'd once claimed made her feel beautiful. And now it was draped over someone who actually cared about making things real. She whispered, barely audible, "I didn't think you'd ever do something like this." I didn't smile. I didn't taunt her. I just said the truth. "You didn't think I'd ever stop being the only one trying." Rachel didn't scream. That almost made it worse. She just stood there staring at Jess like she was seeing a ghost wearing her clothes, living in a version of her life she didn't even know had been stolen. Her breathing came shallow and quick, each one sharper than the last, and for a moment I thought she might actually collapse. But Rachel was nothing if not a performer. She straightened her shoulders, wiped beneath her eyes, and spoke with a controlled calm that trembled at the edges. "I need to understand," she whispered. "How long has this been happening?" Jess shifted slightly beside me, not hiding, not shrinking, just grounding herself. I glanced at her, then back at Rachel. "It didn't start when you think it did," I said quietly. "It didn't start because of sex. It started the moment you stopped looking at me like I was someone who mattered." Rachel let out a small, cracked laugh. "So, this is my fault? That's what you're saying?" "No," I replied. "I'm saying the marriage broke long before Jess walked into this house wearing that robe." Jess looked down, biting her lip, not wanting to add fuel to the fire. But Rachel's gaze snapped toward her anyway, sharp and wounded. "You," she breathed. "How could you do this? To me?" Jess's voice was steady but soft. "You think I planned this? You think I went looking for him?" She shook her head slowly. "Rachel, you left him emotionally months ago. Everyone saw it but you." That made Rachel's face twist, confusion warring with indignation. "Everyone?" Jess hesitated, a fraction of a second too long, and it told Rachel everything she needed to know. Her eyes widened, her voice rising for the first time. You talked about my marriage with people? With friends? With your friends? No, Jess said quickly. Not like that. I just noticed things you didn't want to see. Rachel laughed again, that brittle, hollow laugh of someone trying not to shatter. You noticed things? You noticed things about my husband you thought I wouldn't catch? Jess stepped back like she'd been slapped. It wasn't like that. But Rachel wasn't listening anymore. She turned her gaze on me, eyes blazing with disbelief, hurt, betrayal. You slept with my little sister, Jake. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, and even though she said it like a dagger, I didn't flinch. You slept with strangers, I answered softly. You slept with co-workers, men from bars, people whose names you didn't bother to tell me. I found the photos, Rachel, the burner account, the hotel, the hoodie. Her face drained of color. Her hands trembled. And then, slowly, she sat down at the dining table like her legs refused to hold her. You weren't supposed to see that, she whispered. But I did, I said. And once I did, the rules stopped meaning anything. Jess stepped forward then, not aggressively, but with an earnestness that made the moment feel strangely intimate. Rachel, he didn't go looking for me. I didn't go looking for him. We were both lonely. You pushed him away and pretended it was liberation. Rachel shut her eyes tight, pressing her palms to her forehead. I wanted to feel desired, she murmured. I wanted to feel alive. And you did, I replied. Just not with me. She didn't argue. She didn't deny it. She just sat there, shaking lightly, breathing unevenly. After a long moment, she looked up at me again. Does it mean anything? With her? The question was quiet, but not soft. It carried weight, dread, an undercurrent of hope she couldn't hide. I didn't lie. I didn't soften the truth. Yes, I said. Rachel inhaled sharply like I'd punched the air from her lungs. Her gaze flicked between us, Jess with her steady resolve, me with my calm acceptance, and whatever strength she had left seemed to crumble. It wasn't supposed to get like this, she whispered. I thought opening the marriage would make things better. It didn't, I said. It just revealed everything we'd been ignoring. She nodded slowly, like each movement cost her effort. So that's it? We're done? I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't look like my wife. She looked like a woman I used to know, someone whose chapters no longer included me. It doesn't have to be ugly, I said gently. But yes, it's over. Jess flinched slightly, not from guilt, but from empathy. Rachel stared at the table, at her hands, at the fading remnants of a life she'd tried to rewrite without realizing she was erasing me in the process. Finally, she stood. Her eyes glistened but didn't spill. I need to pack some things. She walked down the hallway slowly, each step quieter than the last, leaving Jess and me standing alone in the kitchen, the aftermath settling around us like dust. Jess looked at me with a knot of emotion tightening her features. Are you sure? She asked. Yes, I said. For the first time, yeah, I'm sure. And for the first time in months, the weight in my chest eased, not completely, but enough to breathe again. Rachel didn't slam doors when she packed. She didn't scream or throw things or accuse us of every sin she could name. That almost made everything heavier. Her silence felt like a weight dropped into the center of the house, pulling at every room, every hallway, every memory. I listened to the rustle of drawers opening, the muted thuds of shoes hitting the floor, the small, choked sounds she tried to muffle. Jess stood beside me, arms folded tightly across her chest, like she wasn't sure whether she should disappear or hold her ground. You don't have to stay, I whispered to her. I'm not leaving you alone with that, she replied, voice firm but gentle. Even if she's not screaming, this is still a storm. She wasn't wrong. Rachel's quiet was its own kind of devastation. When Rachel finally stepped out of the bedroom, she carried a half-filled suitcase and a tote bag slung over her shoulder. She paused at the end of the hallway, staring at the framed photos on the wall. Our wedding day, our first apartment, that vacation we took before everything slid into routine and resentment. Her eyes lingered on each one like she was trying to memorize a timeline she no longer belonged to. Jess took a small step back, not hiding, but giving her space. Rachel noticed. Her gaze softened for half a second before tightening again. She approached me slowly, suitcase wheels whispering over the hardwood. When she stopped in front of me, her throat bobbed like she was swallowing glass. "Is this really what you want?" she asked. Not angry, just exhausted, worn down by the consequences of her own choices. "It's what's left," I said quietly, "and maybe what should have happened a long time ago." She exhaled shakily, eyes glistening. "I never meant to replace you." I held her gaze. "You did, whether you meant to or not." Rachel lowered her eyes to the floor. "I thought opening things would help us. I thought if we took the pressure off, if we let each other breathe, maybe the spark would come back. I never imagined—" Her voice cracked. "I never imagined losing you." Before I could respond, Jess spoke softly from behind me. "You didn't lose him because of me. You lost him before I ever stepped in." Rachel closed her eyes, a single tear slipping free. "I know," she whispered. A long silence settled around us, thick and fragile. Finally, Rachel wiped her cheek and straightened her shoulders. "I'll stay with Lauren for a while, then figure out what comes next." "Okay," I said. It was all I could manage. It was all that needed to be said. She gave Jess one last look, not hatred, but something sadder, something like disappointment layered with understanding. "Take care of him," she murmured. Jess didn't nod or smile or smirk. She simply said, "I will." Rachel stepped backward, one slow step at a time, like pulling herself out of someone else's gravity. Then she turned, opened the front door, and walked out into the morning light. The door clicked shut behind her, soft but final. The house fell into a silence so deep it felt like the walls were holding their breath. Jess moved first. She walked closer, still cautious, reaching out like she wasn't sure whether she was allowed to touch me yet. "Are you okay?" I didn't answer right away. It wasn't that I didn't know. I did. I felt strangely weightless, hollow in some places, steady in others. But okay? I wasn't sure if that word meant anything yet. "I don't know," I admitted. Jess nodded, her eyes full of something warm and steady. "You don't have to know. You just have to breathe." So I did. One deep inhale, one long exhale. She stepped closer, slipping her arms around me slowly, giving me every chance in the world to step away. When I didn't, she pressed her cheek to my chest, letting me feel her warmth, her steadiness, her quiet reassurance. "It's not going to be easy," she whispered. "But you're not alone." Those words settled into me like a truth I didn't realize I'd been starving for. We stood like that for a long time, just breathing, just holding on to something real in the aftermath of something broken. When she finally pulled back, she looked up at me with a small, almost shy smile. "What now?" she asked. I looked around the house, the photos, the memories, the echoes of a marriage that had ended long before today. And then I looked at Jess, her messy hair, her bare feet, her bright eyes still soft with concern. "We start fresh," I said. "Slow, honest." Jess nodded. "Slow is okay." And for the first time in months, maybe years, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a door I could actually walk through. The days after Rachel left took on a strange, muted quiet. Not peaceful quiet, more like the hush after an argument where no one won. The house felt bigger, the rooms echoing with the absence of someone who had already been half gone for months. I walked through it like I was rediscovering old territory, noticing small things I hadn't paid attention to in years. The creak in the hallway, the way the morning light hit the bookshelf, the faint indentation in the couch cushions where Rachel used to sit scrolling through her phone. Jess gave me space, not because she was unsure of her place, but because she understood I needed to peel myself away from the remnants of a life I'd outgrown. She stayed some nights, left others, always texting before she came by, always checking in without hovering. It was strange, comforting, but strange, to have someone treat me with consideration after months of feeling like a placeholder in my own marriage. One evening, 3 days after Rachel left, Jess showed up with 2 grocery bags and an expression that towed the line between nervous and determined. "I figured you probably haven't eaten anything decent," she said, nudging the door open with her hip. I blinked at her. "You think I can't cook?" "You can," she said, setting the bags on the counter. "But you won't." I couldn't argue with that. She unpacked ingredients with a concentration that made me smile. Pasta, tomatoes, fresh basil, parmesan, and a bottle of wine that was definitely nicer than the stuff I usually bought. "You're cooking for me?" I asked. "Unless you want to starve," she replied without looking up. The easy banter felt natural, grounding, and for the first time in a long time, the kitchen didn't feel tense or hollow. Jess moved around like she belonged there, not claiming the space, not replacing Rachel, just existing in a way that didn't demand anything from me. As she cooked, she talked. Not about Rachel, not about the night everything fell apart, but about classes, friends, her job at the cafe near campus, little things that painted her as more than just the girl who had come into my life at the most volatile moment. I found myself listening, really listening, and feeling something settle in me that had been rattling for weeks. At one point she turned, wooden spoon in hand, eyes bright. "You're not saying much." "I'm not sure what to say," I admitted. She gave me a small smile. "You don't have to perform, Jake. Not with me." That hit deeper than it should have. Maybe because I hadn't realized how much performing I'd been doing. For months, maybe longer. Pretending to be fine. Pretending to be agreeable. Pretending the cracks in my marriage weren't widening every day. Jess plated the pasta and poured wine, sliding into the seat across from me. The moment felt strangely intimate, not because of what had happened between us, but because of what hadn't happened in so long. A quiet dinner with someone who wasn't half looking at her phone or distracted by a world I wasn't invited into. We talked until the candles burned low. At some point, Jess reached across the table and brushed her fingers over mine, gentle, cautious, as if asking a question she wasn't speaking aloud. "You don't regret this, do you?" she asked softly. I took a breath. "I regret the way things happened. Not you." Her shoulders relaxed, just slightly, like she'd been holding that question inside for days. She rose from her seat, walked around the table, and sat beside me, close enough that her thigh warmed mine. "You know," she said quietly, "I didn't expect any of this. I didn't expect you to look at me the way you do now. I didn't expect to feel like I could actually matter to someone." I turned to her. "You matter." Jess swallowed hard, her eyes flicking briefly away. I wasn't sure if I was just a reaction, a rebound, or worse, revenge. The honesty in her voice tugged at something deep inside me. I reached for her hand, threading my fingers through hers. "You're not any of those things," I said. "Revenge doesn't feel like this." She stared at me for a long moment, her expression shifting from hope to relief to something warmer, softer, almost tender. "You sure?" she whispered. "Yes." Jess leaned in then, not to kiss me, not to escalate things, but to rest her head on my shoulder, a gesture that felt more intimate than anything else we'd shared. Her hand squeezed mine, grounding me. "You know what scares me the most?" she murmured. "What?" "That I want to stay." I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of her words settle in my chest. "It doesn't have to be scary." She lifted her head just enough to meet my eyes. "It is. Because this feels real." I brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Maybe that's the point." She smiled, small, sincere, vulnerable, and rested her head against me again. And in that quiet moment, With her warmth pressed against my side and the remnants of dinner filling the air, I realized something simple and undeniable. This wasn't the aftermath of a disaster. It was the beginning of something I hadn't dared to imagine. It's strange how quickly a house changes when the person who kept insisting she was still part of it finally walks out the door for good. The silence that followed Rachel's departure settled into the walls like new insulation, warmer, softer, no longer tense with expectation or disappointment. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was waiting for her return, waiting for an excuse, waiting for the next lie I'd force myself to accept. There was no next thing now, just space, just breathing. Jess moved through that new quiet with a kind of gentleness I didn't expect from her. The first few days, she tiptoed through the house like she wasn't sure what belonged to her and what didn't, even though I wasn't asking her to claim anything. She didn't sleep over every night. She didn't try to fill the void Rachel left. She just existed beside me in a way that felt real, unforced, a slow unfurling rather than a takeover. The night she finally stayed without hesitation began with rain, the kind that drums on the windows and makes the whole world sound softer. She arrived soaked from the shoulders down, hair plastered to her cheeks, breathing hard from running up the walkway. "I didn't bring an umbrella," she said, laughing breathlessly. "You never do," I replied, pulling her inside. She shivered in my arms, not from cold, but from the shift in the air when the door closed behind us. There were no secrets anymore, no hiding, no triangles or rules or careful avoidance. Just her, just me, just the truth. I handed her a towel and watched her pat her hair dry, only half paying attention because I was still struck by how she'd sprinted through the rain to get here. She caught me staring and raised an eyebrow. "What?" she said. "You showed up like you were afraid I'd disappear," I replied. Jess looked down at her hands, twisting the corner of the towel. "I guess I'm still scared of taking up too much space," she whispered. "Like if I breathe too loudly, I'll mess everything up." It hit me then. The girl who slid into my DMs months ago, bold and chaotic, wasn't fearless at all. She was brave, yes, but brave people are usually the ones who know exactly how much they stand to lose. I stepped closer, placing my hand under her chin so she'd meet my eyes. "You're not messing anything up," I said softly. "You're the only thing that's felt right in a long time." Her breath caught. Not dramatically, just a small, involuntary sound that made my chest tighten. When she leaned into me, it wasn't with urgency. It was with trust. Her arms slid around my waist, her cheek pressing against my chest, and I felt her exhale like she'd been holding that breath for weeks. We didn't kiss right away. We didn't rush toward the next inevitable moment. We stood there in the entryway, wrapped in the scent of rain and warmth and something new, letting the weight of the last weeks settle into place. Jess rested her forehead against my collarbone, her fingers lightly gripping the fabric of my shirt. "I don't want to be a replacement," she whispered. "You're not," I replied. "I don't want to be a mistake." "You're not that either." She looked up at me then, eyes wide, vulnerable, hopeful in a way that made my pulse quicken. "Then what am I?" I brushed my thumb along her jaw, letting the answer come naturally instead of forcing it into something poetic. "You're someone I choose," I said. "Not because I'm hurting, not because she left, but because when I'm with you, the world stops feeling like a problem I'm supposed to solve." Jess swallowed hard. Then she reached up and kissed me. Slow at first, searching, as if memorizing the shape of something she wasn't sure she deserved. I kissed her back, just as slow, letting the moment swallow the last pieces of doubt between us. When we pulled apart, she smiled. Not the mischievous grin I'd seen a dozen times before. This one was soft, sincere, a little shy. "So, we're really doing this?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "We are." Later that night, when she fell asleep beside me with her hand resting lightly on my chest, I stared at the ceiling and let the quiet sink in. Not the painful quiet that used to stretch between Rachel and me like a warning, but a peaceful one, the kind that feels earned. For the first time in a long time, the future wasn't a thing I was bracing myself against. It was something open, something possible. Rachel and I would have to talk again, about logistics, about dividing the life we'd built, about the ending neither of us had imagined. But that was a conversation for another day, and when it came, I'd face it honestly, without bitterness, without regret. Jess murmured my name in her sleep then, her fingers curling gently against my skin. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt a quiet truth settle in my chest. Sometimes you don't realize how lonely you've been until someone finally steps into the empty space and fills it with something warm, something real, something worth holding on to. And this time, I wasn't letting it go.